Normally with these kinds of videos I'd be looking back at the Grand Prix just gone and looking at all the talking points and bits and pieces like that, but the actual race, well, not a lot happened, but there is a lot of stuff going on in the background that is just peak FIA and makes everybody just go, oh god, here we go again. And there's also a conspiracy theory to talk about. They're always fun. It's still out there that the McLaren is pretty damn good, even without using that cheeky flexy rear wing that they've been using at Baku to get a slight advantage towards the end of the long straight, where they needed a bit of a boost to allow Piastri to keep Leclerc and Perez at bay as their DRS overspeed kicked in. The amount of boost it gave them was just enough to not allow for a slam dunk overtake into turn 1. In the lead up to the Singapore Grand Prix yesterday, McLaren's rear wing, which I called legal but cheeky, was downgraded to just cheeky. As the FIA said, yeah, no, get rid of it. But it looks like that the iffy rear wing wasn't the cause of McLaren's pace at all, no matter how many times people screamed cheaters on Twitter after the race, because McLaren was not using that iffy rear wing. Lando went on to dominate the whole weekend, with the F1 Facebook page putting the caption, "Completed it mate," next to a graphic of Norris with the title, "Domination," which drew some utterly unhinged comments from some, saying that the British bias was real and stuff like that. The guy won by over 20 seconds, he was lapping a second faster than Verstappen at times, and led every lap in the race from pole position. It was a dominant win. No lie was told in that graphic. Even if he did almost put it in a wall. The scary thing is, he almost walled it twice. I don't know what Lando was trying to prove out there. He was by far the fastest man on the track on longer runs because the Red Bull is great over 1 or 2 laps before it starts to suffer. And to be fair, the Red Bulls didn't suffer anywhere near as hard at Singapore this year as they did last year. So it'll be interesting to see what happens at Austin when they go there, and hopefully I'll get onto all of that in a minute. But with Lando almost sticking his car in a wall and saying he might have front wing damage, it looked like overdriving. McLaren did say they wanted him to up the pace to try and cover off an undercut, but when he was that far ahead, there was no reason to do any of that. No risks required. It's a little bit like when Senna crashed at Monaco in 1988, overdoing it to try and beat Prost by a massive margin. Now, before people start going on at me in the comments, I'm not comparing Lando to Senna in terms of talent levels, I'm just saying that Lando and Senna both overdrove it and, well, one of them crashed and one of them almost crashed. But it seemed that Lando was just living dangerously. On the first stint he locked up into turn 14 and that was where he thought he got the front wing damage. He then gave a wall a kiss with his rear wheel later on and ran wide while lapping the Williams of Franco Colapinto. Colapinto went on to finish 11th in the race, keeping up his consistent performances and once again making James Vowles and the team's decisions to bin off Sargent seem justified. Already. But in general, it seemed that the McLaren had some tyre whispering abilities the other cars didn't. Piastri stayed out until lap 38 of the 62 on the board, and in doing so, managed to stay out long enough that Russell simply pitted out of his way, and when Piastri pitted himself, he just sailed on by with the tyre advantage and got himself up to 3rd at the end of the race, for a nice trophy and a bottle of bubbly. Had he started in 3rd ahead of the 2 Mercedes, maybe it would have been another McLaren 1-2. I never saw it, but apparently in the cool-down room, Oscar and Lando saw that wall kiss later on in the race, and Lando had this look of anxiety about him, and Oscar said, describe that, but without swearing. Speaking of which, yeah, there was that, wasn't there? Something that had cropped up in the last week or so that is something that a lot of people just found baffling. Look, I like swearing. I think it's cool. I think it's funny. A lot of statements can be made funnier and more impactful when you add a swear word before something. It's cold outside becomes much more impactful if you add a certain word starting with F in between it's and cold. But long story short, the FIA president, Mohammed bin Sulayem, has been quoted as saying he wants the drivers to watch their language on the radios, which is something you're never going to stop. You've got 20 drivers running around a racetrack in control of a machine that tops out at around, 225 miles an hour. That's pretty quick. When you're driving something like that and something goes wrong, you're going to exclaim something in the realms of something that'll need a bleep or 6 because you're in a 225 mile an hour racing car. I'll refer you to something that Sebastian Vettel said at the Bahrain Grand Prix a few years ago. In the cool-down room after the race, clips of the race were shown, and as they watched the start, Hamilton said of Verstappen, "He's such a dickhead." In the press conference afterwards, a Dutch journalist who apparently has to try and make everything about Max and drum up a story about Max in any way, shape or form possible because Dutch bias, asked Lewis about the dickhead comment that he made in the cool-down room, and Seb, being the nice guy that he became after leaving Red Bull, jumped in to defend Lewis. It's not fair. I don't know what Lewis did, I'm sure he didn't, but we've been in this situation with someone and we go sometimes wheel to wheel and it's close and we have a lot of adrenaline going. Do you think, comparing to football, if you have a microphone in front of a footballer's mouth, that everything he says is nice and is a nice message when a guy tackles him? I don't think it's justified to give us these shit questions and making up a story out of nothing if we're racing and full of adrenaline and sometimes we say these things. Let's say if I was to punch you in the mouth, you wouldn't go, "Oh, that's not very nice." It's a human reaction, and sometimes I think it's a bit blown up trying to make these stories out of nothing. And some of these video gamers as well, some of the stuff they say in the heat of competition isn't exactly PG either.
Now, okay.
If only there was some way of communicating
Move
something.
out of the f***ing way!
Well, that worked.
The thing about the team radios is that it's all clipped and broadcast about a lap and a half later, so that the broadcasters can find the best lines and bleep out any of the naughty words that are being said. And on the subject of bleeping, someone put together a compilation of the best uncut swears, including one of Albon that had my wife corpsing when she heard it. But that's the thing, it's on a delay. It's not live, so somebody's picking and choosing what goes out to the live feed. But when you think about it, there are certain broadcast guidelines, at least in the UK, that start getting questioned, especially from me because, well, I do tend to overthink things in these sorts of videos. It concerns something called the watershed. British broadcasting guidelines are pretty simple when it comes to broadcasting bad language. There's a reason why Channel 4 shows reruns of Frasier at 10 AM on a Monday morning and not episodes of The Wire. Similarly, you're not going to find episodes of Sons of Anarchy at the 2 PM time slot on BBC One, and you're going to see Homes Under the Hammer instead, because it's daytime TV and there's rules and regulations, much like there will be in the US, Canada, Australia, Germany, France, Sweden, and so on. Although, that said, when I was in Viborg, it's pronounced Viborg, I think, I watched the Danish equivalent of Coronation Street, and the teenage character had naked women all over his bedroom wall, at 4 PM on a Sunday afternoon. That would never wash here. So there's going to be different broadcasting guidelines for different countries, but I'm talking specifically about the UK here. At around 8 PM, you start to see a relaxation in the rules. Later episodes of Top Gear towards the end of the run that had Clarkson, Hammond and May would have had an uncensored word here or there. And the irony is, even though I'm being educational and or factual right now, I can't use some of the words because of YouTube's advertising guidelines and how I have to skirt around that. Oh well, it's their sandpit, their rules. After 9 PM though, that's when all bets are off. You can say pretty much any swear word you want apart from the big C. Shows like 8 out of 10 Cats, The Inbetweeners, The Thick of It and programs like that will contain a lot of profanity, and in the case of Jay from The Inbetweeners, colourful sexual imagery, and they'll be allowed to broadcast that without it being heavily edited or bleeped. And as a fun aside here, you might, but at the same time you might not, have seen something along the lines of Star Trek episodes that were banned by the BBC or something, stuff designed to whip people up into a frenzy over censorship and, that kind of thing with literally no context whatsoever. Stick with me here. There is an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation that was originally never shown in the UK because the broadcaster that had the rights to Star Trek at the time was the BBC. The episode, which was called Conspiracy, had a plot centred around some parasitic organisms taking control of Starfleet officers and then infiltrating Starfleet in San Francisco on Earth, and the episode was banned because it was considered too violent for the time slot that the BBC was showing it, about 6 PM on BBC Two. Dinner time, basically. The offending scene had Lieutenant Commander Drexler's head exploding as Riker and Picard shot him with a phaser that was set to fry. But in general, that episode was incredibly dark for Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek. So, with a very long-winded context included for you, most Formula 1 races for us in the UK will start anywhere between 1 PM and 3 PM on a Sunday afternoon. On a race day, not every Sunday afternoon, even though it feels like it at the minute. But as per the request for Sul AM to not broadcast sweary messages, it's actually quite reasonable. It's 2 PM on a Sunday afternoon, it's before the watershed, so they've got to be careful with how much they broadcast because rules and stuff, Ofcom likes to get involved with this kind of thing. And at the same time, it's reasonable because it's something that F1 can directly control. But actually telling the drivers to not swear at all on the radio, you're shouting at a brick wall in that case. In situations that you have no full control over, absolutely, apologise to the audience if some swearing is overheard. But if you're actively looking for sweary sound bites to broadcast, then you're just dropping yourself in it. Scott McLaughlin plucking first and giving it some jandal springs to mind. That was out of V8 Supercars control what he was saying. Or Rob Holding asking how Adama Traore went down when he's, quote, built like a brick outhouse. Alright, not the exact words he used, but you get the picture. Lockdown football was actually quite fun to watch. However, in press conferences there's a certain expectation to keep your language in check. Same for on the podiums. Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Raikkonen were warned about their language on the podium at the 2012 or 2013 Italian Grand Prix. Verstappen is the world champion, so he's going to be held to a higher standard than most drivers. Only Hamilton and Alonso will be close in terms of those standards expected. Now I get that in the Netherlands you can say words that are unbroadcastable here, as Paul Stoddart found out to his delight at the 2005 US Grand Prix. But community service for swearing in a press conference, that's a bit far. Slap Verstappen with a hefty fine, make him apologise, and move on. He said his car was, quote, fucked. He's speaking in his second language. It was a slip. The FIA's made a much bigger deal of this than necessary. Just so we're making this quite clear, swearing on the radio, go for it. Swearing in a press conference or an official setting, probably not a good idea. I still think the punishment is stupid. Just making sure that we're all on the same page here. You know, time and place. I guess time and place is the best way of putting it. The things that you say with the lads on Discord aren't necessarily the things that you'd say in front of your God-fearing grandmother. If my nan said to me, can you play something on the guitar for me? I'm going to play Paul Simon, not Rage Against the Machine. And Sulayem's comment about, we're not rappers, you know, they say the F word how many times a minute? We are not on that. That's them, and we are us, has got a lot of people talking. It's quite a snobby outlook on things. Plus, come to the black country. We use that word like it's a comma, and you race in Australia. There's another word down in Australia that they love to use. So that's why it's hilarious that Max turned his press conferences into an episode of 24 Hours in Police Custody, saying no comment to virtually everything. It's like when you tell a comedian what jokes he can't say, or telling a band not to play a specific song. They're going to go against you. They're going to meme it, and they're going to meme it hard. The difference is, in other sports, they're not mic'd up like they are in Formula 1. As I record this, the kids at the primary school on the next road are on their lunch break, and I can hear them playing on the school playground. I guarantee they are going to hear much worse on that playground than what is being broadcast on Formula 1. I don't even know how I've managed to devote so much time in this video to this specific thing, but here we are. If anything is picked up in other sports, whether that's football, rugby, American football, ice hockey, basketball, golf, or anything like that, then they just say, oh, sorry if you heard that, and then they move on. Formula 1 is intentionally broadcasting this stuff at a time that is considered to be family time on a Sunday afternoon. So I don't know how that fits in with all the broadcasting rules, but they must be doing something right because they continue to do it. The thing is, they're intentionally looking for those sweary messages, and they've been broadcasting these for years. There was a Monaco practice session, I can't remember when it was, it might have been 2017, 2018 or something like that. Daniel Ricciardo gave a very naughty message over his radio that contained the C word, and Crofty had to apologise for it because that's the one that you don't use on TV at all. Speaking of Ricciardo, is Daniel Ricciardo's F1 career over? Rosberg explosion. With it already looking likely he'd be cast aside for Liam Lawson next year, so finish out the season and then be cast aside, the look on the face of the Honey Badger after the race yesterday was one of a man who knows it's over but can't say so just yet. And it's also rumoured his very presence in that RB car is part of the spat between Marco and Horner, because Marco wants Lawson in that car while Horner seems to want to keep Ricciardo around. Ricciardo's race went badly, and the only thing that was some sort of a consolation for him was getting the fastest lap, despite that fastest lap not actually getting him any points, since he wasn't in the top 10. In anticipation of his departure, which at the time of writing has not been announced, fans voted him the driver of the day, but the race made a point in their assessment of things. While Perez has been close to being dropped over the course of this season, Ricciardo hasn't exactly made a convincing case for him to be given his seat at the main Red Bull team back. And with it being almost a month until the next race in Austin, getting rid of Ricciardo now would make sense, as it would give Lawson enough time to prepare for that race in Austin and any future races thereafter, while the likes of Behrman in Saudi Arabia and more recently Franco Colapinto had barely any time to get going and had to go straight in at the deep end. And to be fair to Behrman and to Colapinto, they haven't done too badly. But with Red Bull invested in Lawson, the month ahead seems as good a time as any to say, right, Daniel, you're gone. Liam, you're in. As much as it will upset people that Ricciardo could potentially be moved on for Lawson. He's a nice guy, he won at Monza, he smiles a lot and bits and pieces like that. But he's behind Yuki Tsunoda in the championship standings and only has 5 more points than Behrman, who has only done 2 races. But where some controversy has been generated, maybe even overblown, is that Ricciardo grabbing the fastest lap at the end of the race yesterday means that if Lando finishes every race as the winner, Verstappen can still finish second and win the championship. Now, Lando winning the championship has always been a long shot. I've always said that Verstappen is still going to win it, but questions are being asked by McLaren boss Zak Brown about how all of this works. Red Bull's other team getting the fastest lap means that it's been made even harder for his driver to win the championship. At least, that's what the perception is. The way it works is you have to be in the top 10 with the fastest lap to get the point. Outside of the top 10, you don't get a point. Nobody gets the point. So it's not like they go, well, Lando had the fastest lap in the top 10, so he gets the bonus point. Nope, doesn't work that way. The problem is, a lot of people are finding this incredibly convenient. It's going to once again raise the question of team ownership, and whether Red Bull should be forced to sell Toro Rosso or whatever they're calling them now. Some are saying that on this particular occasion, Zach is right. But it goes to show how dull the Singapore Grand Prix was if I devoted more to Verstappen swearing than I have to the actual race. I suppose I've got this perceived controversy about RB getting the fastest lap and Ricciardo getting the fastest lap, and also Ricciardo potentially being dumped off for Lawson. But this whole thing with the FIA imposing this penalty on Max, this community service thing, is only going to start making Max think even more seriously about walking away from the sport when he's still got way more to give. Although he has said that he does want to move on to other things in his racing career, whether that's the WEC, IndyCar or whatever. I think he's got that GT3 thing that he started up to get sim racers into real motorsport. But either way, at the minute, the FIA are making themselves look like a right bunch of So then, a look at some of the stuff that happened around the Singapore race weekend. If you think I've made some good points and I've given you some food for thought, do leave a like and get a discussion going down in the comment section. And if you're not already, get subscribed and also get that bell on so you'll be notified whenever a future video goes live. There's also some special thanks that, as ever, go to the lovely people over at Patreon that continue to support me at a more personal level. And if you want to help cover some of the expenses around here, a link to Patreon will be in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, my affiliates, and other bits and bobs that you might want or need to know. Well, there's super thanks if you want to buy me a coffee and cancel out any demonetization that this video gets. And there's also memberships if you want a Patreon alternative. So until next time, I've been Millward. Have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.